Good evening. Welcome to Deschutes Public Library's online programming. I'm Liz Goodrich, part of the community relations team at Deschutes Public Library. Before I introduce today's speaker, just a couple of housekeeping details. We do have an ASL interpreter with us tonight. Ray, thank you for joining us. If you have questions for Judith, please put those in the Q&A. You can click on the Q&A button. And Judith, I didn't even ask you before. Do you want to answer questions at the end, or do you want to answer them as they come up?
The end is fine. Yeah, we can do
Okay.
that.
All right. We'll hold questions till the end. It is my distinct honor to introduce our speaker tonight. Judith Sadora is a licensed marriage and family therapist in Oregon and Nevada. She completed her master's in marriage and family therapy and is currently in a doctoral program for marriage and family therapy. She has experience working with individuals, families, couples, and parent-child dynamics, and specializes in working with adopted families, especially within transracial adoption. She consults with organizations and programs seeking clinical training as it relates to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and is currently co-chair of the National Association of Therapeutic Schools and Programs Diversity and Inclusion Committee. She believes in the power of generational health and wealth, and that it first begins with addressing and processing historical generational trauma related to oppression inflicted on communities. She is also a supporting staff at the Healing Justice Collective of Central Oregon, an organization that resources culturally based and historically oppressed people in their healing. Please welcome Judith Sadora. Judith, thank you so much for joining us tonight. You're on mute, and then you can go ahead and share your screen.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate that. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen real quick. Yeah, it's so interesting because so often I'll come and do talks and have conversations with the community, and there's specific topics. This one was something that I was super excited to do because it allowed me to be more creative with it. Being in like academia and in the mental health field, sometimes you can get so boggled down by clinical jargon, right? Terms and some of the way of speaking that it's so nice to be able to just show up, right? And just be able to just speak freely, creatively, and do things a little bit differently. So tonight or this evening, I'm hoping to kind of just share my journey and my story through storytelling. And I like doing it through using pictures, imagery to be able to do that. And so like the title of this talk is Stories We Tell Ourselves About the Wild. And so I want to take you all through a journey of what the wild meant for me, my beginning journey, and what it's evolved into now, present day, and what I hope that it would continue to evolve into through my journey. And so just a little bit about me and some of the stuff I'm going to talk about. It's going to be it seems like sometimes my story can feel linear in the way that I share it. And it's not necessarily linear. There's a lot of gray areas. There's a lot of in-between things there. And that's okay, right? I'm only going to speak to just my experience of being one with nature, coming to love the outdoors, utilizing it not just in my personal life, but also in my career, and how the impact of that has been for me. And just where I'm at today around it. And like I mentioned, I'm going to use pictures to kind of share a little bit about what that story is. And I'm hoping that I can do it. I don't talk too much, that I actually take up all the time and don't leave room for questioning, Q&A. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and get started. First, I want to take the time to do a land acknowledgement. I think it's so important to not only bring acknowledgement to the lands that we are on, that we work on, that we have our ways and we have our beings on, understanding the first peoples that were here, the land that it originally belonged to, and it still does in a lot of ways. And so not only bringing awareness and that acknowledgement of it, but also to the hope is to always be able to challenge and challenge oneself around how we can give back, right? How can we actually take a justice lens on the people that this land belongs to in a lot of ways, and doing our part. And so I want to honor the Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs. So I'm going to read a land acknowledgement that is often used by myself and the women that I work with in the Healing Justice Collective. I just appreciate. And so we honor and acknowledge the resilient Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs. They were gathered together in 1937 by the Warm Springs people, the Northern Paiutes people, and the Wasco people, after relinquishing about 10 million acres of land to the colonizers back in 1855. We honor the rightful stewards of the land that we now reside in, the land that nourishes us, the land that brings our communities together, and the land that to this day continues to be stolen lands. We acknowledge and honor the Indigenous people who are with us today, who continue to fight for freedom and justice, those who are thriving and those who have lost their lives as a result of genocide. We honor the wisdom and the healing practices of the Indigenous people as we leaned on them for support when we are brought over forcefully. We acknowledge that the healing concepts we provide derive from and are inspired by traditional Indigenous practices. In solidarity and through action, we hope to thrive together as we continue to work towards creating pathways to protect, to preserve, and fight for this land to be returned. I always have to try to not get too emotional when I read that. That was written by a very dear friend of mine, Fatima Castro, in those beautiful words. And so all the time, it's just a reminder again of our history, the context of it. And if I am a lover of nature, a person that desires to commune with nature, then there's this idea that there's this understanding that I have to bring acknowledgement to that. Yeah, the land that I'm on and I play on, I take up space on. Just bringing that acknowledgement and awareness. So thank you for participating in that moment with me. So with that, I'm going to share my story of just how I began my experience with the outdoors. I've done there's been some interviews that I've done and people often ask me, Judith, how did that begin? Like, what did you have experience when you were younger? What happened? And I like to often say that the person that you see today that is in the outdoors and that loves to take up space in the outdoors and in nature is the same person that took up space in nature, but did not know that that's what they were doing, right? A lot of the times we think that nature is defined as something specific, and that's not necessarily it. And so this talk is really going to be identifying ways, like using my story and the experience that I had, identifying the ways that there were social constructs that were built in that I adapted to, that I assimilated into when it came to being an outdoorsy person. And in my journey in breaking through some of that, right? Breaking down and deconstructing some of those social constructs, and now taking up space in a way that is genuinely authentic to who I am as not just a woman, an identifying woman, but also a Black, Afro-Haitian American woman, right? With a lineage and an ancestry of Africa. And so the way that I take up space and the way that I choose to commune with nature now is so different from the way I did before. And so that's what the journey of me talking about my story is gonna look like, and how mental health plays a big part in that. In the beginning of my journey, in this picture, I am at Red Rock Canyon. Red Rock Canyon is in Las Vegas, Nevada. I lived there for about 13 years. Prior to that, I'm originally born and raised in New Jersey, lived upstate New York for a while, and then I moved to Vegas, to out west in 2008, and lived there for about 10 years until I moved here in Central Oregon. And prior to experiencing the outdoors in this specific way in Nevada, the way I experienced the outdoors was being at the park, hanging out with my friends, city living, right? Living in the city, We always hung out at the park. We would catch buses, we would walk everywhere. And so my experience with being in the outdoors was very different. It was in line, and it was in alignment with being in the city. But that doesn't mean that I didn't experience the outdoors. It was just a different form of outdoors, right? Playing at the park and things like that. And then it moved over to, I didn't know that's what I was doing. I will say in preference that I wasn't consciously aware of that. And then when I moved to Nevada, there was something in me that felt like I needed to actually experience, be exposed to the outdoors. There were certain people that had come into my life, in and out of my life, that had talked about hiking, going out into nature and hiking. And I was like, what? You just hike up in the woods? I've walked a lot growing up. I walked to school. I walked to the park. I hung out in the streets. Like, that's what I did. And so walking is no big deal. I loved doing that. I loved being outside. And so I looked into hiking and was like, I want to do that. And so there was a moment in my time where I kind of hit rock bottom, struggled with depression and anxiety. And at that moment, I was searching for something different. I was searching for spirituality, my relationship with higher power, which is God for me, and searching for something that was sustainable for me in a lot of ways. And so in that, I decided to I took a sabbatical off of like everything that I was doing and decided that for 3 weeks, I am going to each day go out to Red Rock and hike by myself, and hike. And I did that. And it was that began a journey for me. That began actually the conscious journey of me being in nature, right? So now it raised this critical consciousness within me in regards to who I am and my being in nature and what it did for me, especially with my mental health. It really helped my anxiety, my depression. Not only that, but physically, I was feeling better because of hiking and exercising. Also, too, the less distractions I had. Being out in nature, it caused me not to be in busy work in the city of Vegas, especially in the places that I was in. And so I started to see that shift in so many different ways for me. And even money. I just wasn't hanging out with my friends, going out and eating. Instead, I would pack up a lunch from home and I would go and spend the whole day right before sundown at Red Rock. And so I was financially seeing a significant change, physically a significant change, and emotionally, and even mentally in terms of my capacity to hold my attention span, and also resiliency. There was a sense of resiliency, and also empowerment and strength that I was experiencing as well too. And so with that began me from that moment, that began my journey of like, okay, I am a person that often goes outside in this specific way, right? And so what that looked like was I wanted to learn everything about being outdoors. I wanted to know what it felt like. What do I need? How am I safe? I mean, YouTube was my best friend. Watching movies, reading books was my best friends. Even to the point where REI was hiring, and I lived like around the corner from REI in the Henderson location in Nevada. And I was like, I'm going to go work there. I'm going to see if I can get a job there. And I did. And I worked there. And when you work at REI, you get a lot of access to benefits. The pro deals are ridiculous because gear is expensive as heck. And so I was able to actually afford my hobby, right? My passion, the new thing that I wanted. And so that came a lot of researching. What is the gear to have? I remember that in that time where I went and did my hiking at Red Rock, I barely had anything. I just literally I went to Walmart, got me a little backpack, did a little bit of the stuff, and then went out. And that sufficed it. It was fine. And I remember in that time too, music was a big deal for me. I would hike and I would listen to music and I would sing. I love to sing. I'm a singer. And that was in those moments that I would really embrace my singing ability, my talent. And just like, that was a way that I felt connected spiritually out there as well too, to my higher power. And then after that, like I mentioned, I went on a research binge, and then I started to figure out what it meant to be outdoorsy in the community and in a society context, right? Societal context. And so getting the gear, going to the garage sales, what kind of pants, what kind of backpacks you want to get, even just navigation equipment. You got your GoPro. I mean, I submersed myself into that stuff. And then I remembered, fast forward later, I met my fiance at the time, who's my husband now. I met my partner, and we were going to get married. And I remembered we wanted to go backpacking for our honeymoon. I was like, listen, we're going to go for our honeymoon. I want to do something big. I want to go backpacking. I want to do outdoor stuff. I want to go whitewater rafting, zip lining. I wanted to experience it all. And we went to British Columbia in Whistler and did that. And before we did that, I made sure to buy all of my gear, because I knew that I needed to get all of my gear prior, because I knew I was gonna stop working at REI, because I had just started. I was gonna start the marriage and family master's program. I had decided that I think it's time for me to start to go back to school and get some further my education around being a therapist. And in my journey of going back to school, becoming a therapist, I continued to participate in outdoor recreation, continue to experience a lot of the positive impact of being out in nature. And one of the biggest thing that seems so consistent for me is not having the distractions, being able to retreat. And then I started to notice that instead of doing outdoor recreation, like going backpacking and hiking by myself, I wanted to do it with communities. There was a hunger for community. Even though I originally did it by myself, there was a hunger for community in a lot of ways. And that meant a lot to me. And so in the process of going to school, I graduated from my master's program. And then I remembered there was a point in my life where I was seeing clients at a clinic in Vegas. I remember telling myself, like, I don't think I can see the traditional therapy. I don't think that's me. I don't think I can see clients back to back in an office. I knew there was something I wanted to do more. And I remember thinking to myself and telling my partner, like, I really, really wish that I can put two of my loves together, therapy and being outdoors. And I didn't know that there was a way to actually do that until a colleague of mine had gotten a job at working for a wilderness therapy program in Utah. It was wilderness therapy in Utah. He contacted me about it, and I think I literally lost it. I was like, how did I not learn about this and this even just being possible when I was in my program? And so I went ahead and researched so much about wilderness therapy and found out that it is an entire sect of its own, an entire industry of its own. And it's meant for working with adolescents and young adults who are going through mental health issues, mental health illness, or struggling, or substance abuse, needing some time away, right? They're needing some time away to be in a space where they're not with the distractions, and they have a supportive staff that's supporting them and helping them through, and also therapists that's working with them, but in nature, right? Fell in love with it, knew that's where I wanted to go. And so I created a pathway for myself of like strategically planning things where that is where I'm going to end up. Fast forward later, I became a wilderness therapist. I moved to Central Oregon just to be a wilderness therapist because I knew the program and company that I wanted to work for. I knew what I wanted to do. And there were so many strategical things that led me to that place. It was an amazing opportunity for me in a lot of ways. And it was also a challenging and eye-opening opportunity for me in a lot of ways as well, too. I worked specifically with adolescent boys of color in wilderness. Wilderness therapy is a predominantly industry and environment in SEC in a lot of ways. And I, in my work of being a therapist, I have a passion of working with communities of color, specifically identifying African American or Black individuals, right? I have a passion for that. And the reason being is that I believe that healing looks very different for that population than anybody else, than the predominant culture, which is what you call white culture, right? And so European descent individuals. And so in my work at Wilderness Therapy, I realized more than ever that I wanted to provide equitable work to the clients that I was working with. And sometimes that's not always easy when you work in a system that is predominantly white or European. And so it became a challenge for me to identify, like, how can I provide healing and take up space and have my clients take up space in a way where our country, our world is behind on what it means to be equitable, what it means to be diverse, what it means around inclusion and such. And so fast forwarding later, I appreciated the time that I had as a wilderness therapist and realized for myself that I needed to really challenge what wilderness looked like for me, what nature actually looked like for me. Through that time of being a wilderness therapist, I realized that nature only looked one way. From the beginning of when I began my journey outdoors, I remember that I was more authentically myself in nature, right? Without any social constructs of what it's supposed to look like, until I started working at REI and doing all this stuff. And that's not necessarily bad. I don't want to say that that's bad necessarily. And at the same time, I realized some patterns of just assimilating to culture and the pressure of, you cannot really do nature or be a part of it if it doesn't look like A, B, and C. And that's when I started to deconstruct and pull back, take some space around that and say, okay, Judith, what does nature mean to you? What does it mean to be equitable? And even just the idea of the lands that we're on. Who did these lands belong to prior? I was a wilderness therapy, and rarely were those even talked about in the industry in itself. And that was always felt problematic to me in a lot of ways. And so I realized that there was so much more depth, so much more history, so much more connection to nature for me as a Black individual than I had ever, than I knew of. And I knew I had to find out. I need to figure that out. So I decided it was time for me to step away from wilderness therapy. And before I even stepped away from wilderness therapy, I began that journey well before I stepped away from that position and that role. I decided I need to take up space. And what does that space look like for myself? Really breaking down, again, the constructs of what it meant to be a wilderness therapist, or to be not even a wilderness therapist, but someone who connected to nature. I had to reimagine connection. Part of the work that I did is I had to do some identity work around my ancestry, connecting to, I realized that prior to that, I picked up gardening. I loved to garden. There was something about being in the dirt. There was something about working the land just felt natural to me. There was something about music out in wilderness that felt natural to me, rhythm. At the same time, in my journey of experiencing the outdoors and being a part of it, I remember being singled out, right? Rarely did I ever see people of color taking up space on the trail. I never saw that. It was so minimal for me. And then not only that, but I also experienced this sense of, if I don't show up a certain way, if I don't wear the type of gear, if I don't fit into this model, then I'm not necessarily doing it right? If I'm not going on a hard trek, if I'm not, summiting a mountain, then I'm not exploring correctly. Exploring looks like this. There's this challenge to do it this way. And so I started to realize the very thing that helped me with my depression, right? With my anxiety, started to actually recreate anxiety for me in some ways, because of the narrative and the story behind what the hours was supposed to look like for me. And working in wilderness therapy, working with kids of color out in nature, they had a hard time connecting with nature, I found too, because nature had to look a certain way. Majority of the staff that worked in wilderness therapy were European, right? The outdoorsy, Pacific Northwester, and then there's specific brands and the way that you dress. And so I even started to show up into my job differently. I would wear sneakers to work. I wouldn't wear the brands. I would wear, and I did this anyway, but I remember prior to that, I would make sure that I'm wearing the right type of gear in some ways, but then later on, I was like, I can wear my headscarf. I wear a lot of African headscarf and I can wear that and that's going to be fine. I don't have to get the latest gear to be out there. And so there was a lot of deconstructing in that way. And then what I noticed is that it started to shift and change even the narratives that my clients that I was working with out in the wilderness, in the way that they viewed and saw wilderness, right? Like, oh, you're a person of color and you work here. Like you're outside, you go backpacking, you're a wilderness therapist, or oh, you look like that, or even something that I did because I loved music so much. I also would bring music. I would bring songs and I would play it in my truck and play it loud enough for them to be able to listen to it. And we would talk about it and we would talk about what came up for them and them even realizing, oh, you can actually play music out here in the woods. It's like, yes. So often, even when I've been in a trail, I've been given dirty looks about even just playing a song because it's too loud. There's this narrative that when you're out in nature, that there needs to be this complete quietness. And that's not saying that that doesn't help and there aren't appropriate times for that. And when did it become that is the norm? That's how we have to experience nature. Well, through my process of reconnecting back to my culture, this is the group of ladies that I work with for the Healing Justice Collective. And I am so thankful for these group of ladies because they have challenged me and not even challenged me, but just remind me of the importance of connecting to ancestry, right? Reconnecting and relearning how our ancestors actually connected to nature and what they did. And in that process of reimagining my connection with nature through my own ancestry healing, what I realized is that I have a lineage of people who are connected to nature on a level that was absolutely phenomenal, right? Breathtaking and just beautiful on so many different levels. And I also realized that there are so many different things I wasn't even consciously aware that actually stemmed from my ancestry. I participated and did specific things when I was out in nature that was connecting to my ancestry that I never was consciously aware of, right? And so then it began my journey of kind of continually deconstructing that and saying, okay, when I take up space, I want to make sure that I'm honoring my indigenous roots, who I am, right? As an African individual. When it comes to rhythm and music out in nature, putting my feet on the ground, feeling my feet on the dirt. When it comes to being able to dance, that's another thing that I have always been able to do. And I've always wondering, where does that come from? But I have always been a person that enjoys and loves to dance wildly in nature. Just put music on barefoot and it's dance and how that is connected to tribal dance in a lot of ways, village dancing to my people. And so that has created this sense of healing for me, even healing in terms of my identity and who I am. Something that I also picked up that nature doesn't have to necessarily be you're going on a week backpacking trek or you're going car camping or going for a hike to summit a mountain, but what does nature look like anywhere else, right? Nature can look like the way that you pray, the way that you connect to your higher power. Gardening, I'm a gardener to this day. I have indoor plants for when gardening season is not happening and I don't feel like I'm missing something. And then I have outdoor plants and gardening that I do. I love the smell of dirt. I love growing specific herbs in order to make medicine for myself and tea for myself. And a lot of that I picked up from my mother. And then my mother picked up from her mother. And so there's a lot of like just these generational healing practices that have been passed down I am now utilizing that I never thought of. And so I've watched my my connection to nature morph and evolve in all these different ways. So I have these pictures here because I feel like these pictures just like really depict my power, right? Feeling empowered, and what that's done for my mental health in a lot of ways. Before I saw the benefits of what nature did for me in terms of that and what it does for my kids. I see it. Research shows the benefits that there's improved resiliency. There is a sense of empowerment. It decreases anxiety. It does a lot of things in being outdoor and in nature, and also to the distraction, minimizing the distraction. Your attention span actually increases as well too. Some of the symptoms that you see with ADHD and such, or distraction, or just the inattentiveness is actually, or hyperactivity is actually decreased in a lot of ways. And so there is those benefits that happen. But more and more, what I realize is the more that I am connected to nature, the more I feel empowered in my identity development, which is why I believe that being out in nature with adolescents is so powerful, because where are they at? They're in that identity formation part of their life. That doesn't mean that we just have it in our adolescence. Of course, we have in our adulthood, and that's what happened in my adulthood. To this day, it's still happening. I am still in the process of deconstructing what nature looks like in the social constructs of our society, and making it a part of my ancestral lineage and making it my own. And that is empowering to me and who I am as an identified woman who is African, who comes from African lineage and descent. And so these pictures just signify just my power that I have. It's in my face, it's in my smile, it's in every part of my life. And the best part about it is that I was in different seasons of my life in these 3 photos. Different seasons in my life. And I have a number of different pictures. There's so many pictures and I'm like, I want to use this, I want to use that. And so I had to limit it. But more than ever, I think it just shows my identity development, and how nature was a big part of that in who I am today. So this is what I want to leave you with. This is what I want to encourage, if anything, just encouraging participants to think about is, what is your unique connection to nature and the wildlife? What's your unique connection? Is it grounded in your authentic beingness, right? And is there space to move away from social constructs, what it means to be outdoorsy, what it means to take up space in nature, right? Really gaining some raising in critical consciousness of like, how have I perpetuated just the constructs of what it means to be in nature, and haven't had room to really break down or like identify, okay, what does this actually mean to me? And is this connected to any type of like generational connection to my ancestors, to my lineage, to my great grandparents? How did they connect to land in some way, right? And what we'll notice too is in the process of that, depending on what you racially identify as you're doing some of that work, you may bump into some devastating history, right? Especially if you're European descent, some devastating history, but it doesn't have to stop there. I don't want to say but, and it doesn't have to stop there, right? There can still be so much culture and connection to nature prior to some of the devastating history, and some of that's colonial stuff, right? That's why I open up my talks with a land acknowledgement, because I know that I was forcefully, my people was forcefully, I'm Haitian, so my people were forcefully brought to the land of Hispaniola at the time, that is now known as Haiti. But there were the indigenous people, the Teneo people, they were the indigenous people there, and they were wiped out because of colonialism. And so I know that even my space and my ancestry space in the land of Haiti, I know that it comes with a very harsh history with being forced in that land. And at the same time, I know that my ancestors were able to be in some relationship with the indigenous people that were still there, and was able to have support in how to be in a land that was not their own, which was Africa originally, West Africa. And so I say all of that to say, when you're doing some of this work around reconnecting to nature, having your authentic beingness in there, don't be surprised that there's some uncomfortable information. When you're breaking down even the social constructs of how you connect to nature now, don't be surprised if there is some uncomfortable feelings that come up. And what does it mean to lean into that with openness, with curiosity, with tenderness, right? With humility. What does it mean to do that? Because I had to do that even as a Black individual. And that has been a process to break down and to watch how I assimilated into the social constructs of being an outdoorsy person, but to see how it started before when I was working at REI, to see where I am today, it's been revolutionary. And it has been a big part of my own mental health breakthrough when it comes to identity development. And so that's the questions that I want to encourage you with tonight. And I just want to open up time for any questions. I don't know if I'm over time.
Oh, you're super great. So can you stop sharing your video? Because I've got some questions for you.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. Thank you for sharing some amazing stuff. Thank you. So I'm wondering, I mean, what are you planting in your garden this year?
What do I plant in my garden this year? Well, I will say that I don't have a full-blown garden because I just moved. I moved to Madras. And so my yard looks like I have so much that I'm able to do. I'm developing a whole garden area. I just created my compost bins. I have 3 huge composts because I compost as well too. I'm fascinated by the compost, what our earth does and it's just amazing. So I created that. I have different plants that I have my fruit plants. I have strawberries, I have blueberries, raspberries, and then I have some herbs for teas, my basil, my rosemary, and some sage. Yeah, so there's some of that stuff, but I'm not fully gardening this year because I just moved into my property this year. So my hope is to develop everything for the garden. I already have my raised bed materials set up. I got my compost set up. My hope is to have all of that done and ready by winter, so then I can be ready to actually plant for next spring. It's hard planting in Oregon.
Yeah, I just love when you said you love the smell of dirt, because I do too. So I get that smell. And there is something super rewarding about doing anything in nature and seeing the fruits of your labor, you know, like I grew this, you know, and now I'm going to eat it. Yeah. Okay. So I'm wondering about the Healing Justice collective work. Tell me about that a little more. Just kind of flesh that out a little bit for us.
Yeah, the Healing Justice Collective work. It is a nonprofit. It's the Healing Justice Collective of Central Oregon. It was created by a few of us BIPOC, so people of color in the community. We really felt like, I don't know, there's so many, like, we have a community of us. We've like developed, because we know Central Oregon is pretty white. And so it's a bunch of us individuals of color who are really just like, we were craving community and wanting to connect. And so we built that. But then we were talking about wellness. We are all very, we see and understand what wellness actually means. And with the way that, unfortunately, with just the social unrest and racial unrest that happened this year, but has always been a reality for us and how we've been impacted. We understand and know how trauma impacts social justice work, right? And what it means and wellness. And so we really believe that if you are in a place of healing, if you're in a place of justice work, there has to be a component of healing justice involved in it in order for us to be liberated, in order for us to be healed as a community. And so what we did is we decided, hey, let's create an organization that actually encompasses this like healing justice model. It stems from and is adopted by the Kindred Healing Justice organization, Southern Kindred Healing Justice organization. And so it's like we have a reparations model, which means that what we do is we create programming to resource wellness practices to the BIPOC community, BIPOC community, or communities, people who have been historically marginalized and oppressed. And so that's what we do, is kind of resource through programming. And that can be through crowdsourcing monies, fundraising. We do we apply for grants, and then we actually do grant making. And part of these financial resources are for the BIPOC community that's here in Central Oregon to feel like they have some support, right? in the care that they provide to the community, wellness community as well too. So, and then we also just want to break down what wellness actually looks like, right? Sometimes there is this idea that wellness looks just a specific type of way. And it doesn't. Like I said, nature doesn't look a specific type of way. The way we commune with nature and be a part of the nature doesn't have to look like one way. It can look like so many other different ways. And we believe in ancestral healing, and reconnecting back to who we are and our identity, because that's been lost for a lot of different people, depending on what you racially identify as. And so we do that too, just breaking the narratives around what wellness looks like, centering trauma-informed practices in justice work, and a reparations model that resources wellness programs to our community. That's a lot.
So we've done a poetry slam with Jessica.
Yep.
And we've got one coming up too. And if people are interested, that's an amazing event. So, okay, so let's see. Tell us what you're studying in your doctoral work.
Yes, I'm a doctorate in marriage and family therapy. So it's more so in my mental health like that. And there's been a lot of focus on nature, like specifically African Americans and their relationship to the outdoors. That's what's been a lot of focus and work on. And mostly just finding different ways to create wellness for certain communities. Like, how can we shift and change the narrative around what wellness looks like for specific communities? And so that's been a lot of what I'm studying in my doctoral program right now.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so this is the last fun question.
Mm-hmm.
You're going on a 6-mile hike and you have a backpack. What are the 5 things that you absolutely have to have in your backpack? And you can mention brand names if you want, but I'm just curious, like, what are your hiking must-haves when you go on a hike?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I'm that person that will take everything because I'm like paranoid. I'm gonna be honest with you. I am that person.
Okay, so you can have more than 5.
But I would say something to play music. I have to have the opportunity and ability to play music. Journal, big part of it, because I'm a huge journaler. I love to journal. Part of that is because I have a lot of meditation and like prayer practices, especially when I'm out in nature. There's that. What are some other things that I have to have? So there's my journal. There is music to play. I have to have my dog with me. I know that's not a thing, but I have to have my dog with me. I love being on
your backpack.
Yeah, I know. Can't fit in my backpack, but that's one of those things that I have to have when I go out, because I just love communing in that way. On the spot.
Like snacks? Do you take snacks?
I do take snacks. I love dried fruit. Have to have dried fruit. Have to have some. I love dried mangoes. Dried mangoes is a must because I love dried mangoes. And dried apricots. Apricots, I love that as well too. I love a book also too. I love to read when I'm out there. So there's a book there, and then there's like a list of things. Like I can't even come up to it right now, but I'm just like, there's a lot of things I'm like, nope, that's coming with me. People are looking at me like, Judith, you don't necessarily need that. I'm like, yes, I do need that. And
it's interesting that you mention a book, because it's a question that came through the Q&A from Vera, and she's wondering, have you ever read the book Black Faces, White Spaces by Carolyn Finney?
Yes, and I have.
What did you think about it?
Yes, I've actually used a lot of her writings in my doctoral program as well too. Phenomenal book. Like that is a very, very amazing book for anybody to read if they want to process and understand some of the social constructs that happen. But Finley, like she does a really good job, and she does talks too, but she does a really good job at really processing the trauma that's a lot of times what we see and what we hear is that often people of color don't want to engage with the outdoors. And she does a really good job breaking down why that is. right? In media, what is mostly represented, and the historical trauma to why we don't see a higher rate of people of color in nature. So that was a really good book for me when I was trying to figure out, why is there not people of color on the trails? Like, what is going on? Or even when I would say to my Black friends, like, you want to go camping or want to go backpacking? And they would respond and say, Black people don't do that. I'm not doing that. Or they'll be like scared. Like, there's this sense of anxiety and fear that comes up for them. And the reason why is because there is so much historical trauma that is connected to being out in nature for Black folks, because in nature or in wide spaces, that is where violence happened, especially when we're talking about back in slavery, the lynching and things like that. And so there's so much more to why we don't necessarily see people of color out in nature. And a lot of it is because we've been communicated that we do not belong here, right? Or we've been murdered, or there's been violence and abuse within those spaces. And so mentally, if you're looking at mental health, how does that impact an individual's ability to feel safe, to take up space out in nature, right? Something that was very connected to our ancestry, right? And now we're so disconnected from it because of the trauma that we've experienced in slavery days. And then so on after that, even after slavery was abolished. And so yeah, the book is really good. So thank you, Vera, for bringing that up. That is a good resource.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't see any other questions. Just one last comment in the chat. Thank you. And this is from Udara for sharing your story, Judith.
Thank you for being here and for listening.
I'm going to echo that. That was really generous of you. And I really appreciate you sharing your story tonight. And just a reminder, let's get outside and let's be in community with one another. And thank you so much for this.
Definitely.
Say good night to our guests. I'm going to ask the panelists to stay on just so I can say goodbye. And thank you so much. This program has been recorded. It will be available on our YouTube channel. And thank you so much.
Take care.